You are the father of the top prospect in all of minor league baseball, Connor Griffin. You are the head softball coach at Belhaven. You are also in the athletic department as like an associate AD as well. We're obviously in Jackson, Mississippi, and I've found this personally that in Georgia, Southern California, South Florida, I feel like a lot of these areas, they think that the player needs to hurry up and play one sport early, right? And maybe it's a fear of missing out. Maybe it's wanting to maximize their opportunity. These parents will maybe force that a little bit too much.
I always say that you should do things for a cause and not for applause. That's something that I always tell my players. If you're trying to do something just for a pat on the back, then you're not doing it for the right reason.
Development needs to be the number one thing. Eventually having the success, getting to the big leagues is a byproduct of putting the work in. And if you can take that mentality, you could truly apply that to anything. All right, we're joined here today by Kevin Griffin, and I feel like it's only appropriate that I give you a proper introduction. So I feel like we're going to cover so much today. So number one is you are the father of the top prospect in all of minor league baseball, Connor Griffin. You are the head softball coach at Belhaven. You are also, correct me if I'm wrong, in the athletic department as like an associate AD as well. Is that correct?
That's right.
Perfect. And so what I'd like to get into today, I guess, before we kind of just jump into very specifically softball, baseball related questions, tell us about your, I guess, upbringing in the sport, whether it was from the coaching standpoint, the playing standpoint, but I do feel like I want to level set so these families ultimately understand, like, why should we be listening to Kevin throughout this interview?
Well, obviously growing up, I played basketball, baseball, had a chance to play some college baseball and ended up playing a little bit of semipro baseball, a little independent league. And then I decided I wanted to get into coaching. So I coached high school basketball for over 20 years. From between Georgia and here in Mississippi. I actually moved here from Georgia in 2000 to coach college basketball at Belhaven University. And so I did that for 3 years, got married, didn't want to be on the road recruiting all the time. And so I went back to the high school level here for 8 or 9 years. Coaching basketball and fast pitch softball. And then Belhaven called me and wanted me to come back in January of 2011 to take over the softball program. And here I sit 16, 17 years later, still as the head coach at Belhaven.
Well, what's nice about that too is I feel like there's a lot of coaches that watch this, just specifically thinking about like what makes a good coach. I feel like you can probably speak on that. What was it about maybe your the way that you saw sports, athletics, that made you think like coaching, I know that I want to get into coaching, whatever sport it was?
It's the next best thing from being a player, right? You can do something that you love, be around the sport every single day, and you can impact lives of young people. And I felt like, first of all, when I got into coaching, I was a young person as well. I was only 21, 22 years old doing it. And so I wasn't much older than the kids that I was coaching that first go around. So I was still wanting to impact them. And you find yourself in that situation more on their level because you know what they're going through because you're almost the same age as them. Once I ended up getting a head job, I could kind of relate a little bit to what they were going through and, how I knew that they might handle criticism or handle success or handle failure. And that's really why I wanted to get into coaching so I could help impact young people.
When you think about kind of a trait that is needed to be a successful coach, what jumps out as maybe like the first thing? Because I think a lot of people would hear what you just said and say like, I can empathize with that, right? Like I wasn't good enough to play professional baseball, but I still want to stay around the game and I still have so much to give to, other players maybe my same age. What is something that you think that individual like needs to understand about the role of a coach and what more from like a leadership standpoint?
Well, you got to have patience, number one. And the second thing, and I think it's critical, I really believe you can't treat everyone the same. A lot of people may disagree with that. And like you have to discipline this player just like you would discipline the next player. You have expectations for one player just like you would for the other. I think that's completely false. Every player is different. Their clock from what motivates them, to how you can discipline. Some people may not handle a certain way that you talk to them the same way that somebody else does. So I've learned a lot about how to handle players from one player to the next in regards to everyone's not the same.
I mean, from an agent standpoint, I feel like I can empathize. One of the worst things that an agent can do is treat this business like it's cookie cutter, right? Like what worked for, Albert Pujols is going to work for somebody like Austin Riley. And that is undoubtedly not the case. So what I do love about this conversation though, so far is so many of these parents on some level, like they are the first coach. As a dad to 3 boys, right? All have played baseball. And I know that you have a younger son who's, I think, a 2028, if I'm not mistaken. And obviously Connor, and we talked about him a little bit. What would you tell these parents from that perspective? Like, what advice would you give them about how to properly manage that? And I don't mean from the standpoint of like, make sure you're doing this with your son, but it's more about from the coaching perspective, what should they be doing to help like nurture their son's involvement in whether it's baseball or softball?
Well, they've got to enjoy and love what they're doing. They can't feel like that the sport's being pushed down their throat. Just because a parent played it doesn't mean that that's what the kid wants to do. I've seen so many examples of Clint Hurdle is one that I follow him a lot. Former Pirates coach, currently with the Rockies, I believe. And he does a great job of talking about how his kids didn't enjoy the sports that he enjoyed, and he found himself watching his kids do other things other than baseball, and he loved that. He feels like that's the best thing for his family because he's super supportive of what his kids wanted to do. You can't force it down their throat. That's when they'll just run away from the game. So I found myself over the years, we put our kids in multiple sports, soccer at an early age. I'm glad they didn't end up playing it, but
Right.
But they were athletic and they did a good job in that sport, but that's just not what they wanted to do. I think it's very important that you don't force a sport down your kid's throat and you just let it come naturally. And if they love it, they love it. If they don't, they'll find something else to do.
We're obviously in Jackson, Mississippi, and I've found this personally that there's various states, right? Like, Georgia, we'll even break California up into kind of 2, northern and southern, but, Southern California, South Florida. I feel like a lot of these areas, they think that the player needs to hurry up and play one sport early, right? And maybe it's a fear of missing out. Maybe it's wanting to maximize their opportunity. These parents will maybe force that a little bit too much, and then they no longer get the ability to grow athletically like they otherwise would. Do you find in softball that these girls are only playing one sport? Maybe more so than baseball players?
Yeah, I don't think so. Coming up, I think they all dabble in different sports. Even at Belhaven at the college level, some of my best players that I've ever had in my program also played volleyball in the fall. But they would play volleyball in the fall, miss everything that we did in the fall as far as workouts, show up in the spring, jump right in, and they're so athletic and so good at the sport of softball that they jumped right in and they were all Americans.
And from the mental side too, that's the other thing that I think we don't want to lose sight of, right? Is when you have a kid, let's just say who's 11 years old and he doesn't play anything else, right? Male or female. When you go into baseball full time or softball full time, naturally, I feel like the burnout is a lot quicker, right? So when you have somebody and you're talking about volleyball, even in college, they show up to softball now and it's like, it's fresh, right? Now they're hungry to do all this other stuff. It's different. They haven't been doing the same exact thing for year after year. So I love that you said that. And I certainly encourage people to play multiple sports. Let's talk a little bit about Belhaven. So your first year there was
January of 2011.
And so correct me if I'm wrong. I did a little digging on softball. Was that the year they went from 40 feet to 43? Or was it the next year?
I think it was prior to that.
Oh, it was prior to that. Okay.
Right.
So were you involved with softball before that at all?
Just at the high school level.
What changed in the game of softball, I guess, when they moved it back? Like, did it change the game and how it was played at all?
I think it helped offensively a little bit to back the pitcher up a little bit. But, In Mississippi, you didn't see it as much because softball wasn't as developed in Mississippi as it was in other parts of the country, like California, Georgia, Florida, Texas. But so you didn't really see it a whole lot in Mississippi because fast pitch was relatively new. Late 90s, early 2000s, that's when it kind of got kick-started here. And really, the last 8 to 10 years is when it's really taken off here in our state. But especially from a travel ball perspective and teams that are really good going out playing in these national events like the Colorado Fireworks and Sparkler and going to the Legacy in Atlanta and Chattanooga and those places. So it was really hard to see much difference when it moved back here in this state as it might have been in other states that were that had been playing it a lot longer.
Do you encourage your girls to watch baseball?
I don't really encourage it. I think they just do because that's really what is in their face all the time on TV during softball season and during the summer. Now you have a lot more Athletes Unlimited is providing a lot more softball coverage on national television. And in the summer, you can just about turn on a softball game every night if you have like ESPN, ESPN2, and then the ESPN Plus package. So there's a lot of softball for these girls to watch. So I really don't have to encourage it too much.
Talk a little bit about travel softball. You've obviously experienced the travel baseball side. When you're recruiting for college, is it similar, right? Like if you were to show up, when Connor was going through it and you're going to let's just say it's the World Wood Bat in Atlanta, are you going to these events and are you recruiting travel softball events or is it more camp related? How are you finding the influx of talent that you're recruiting?
Yeah, it's both. We don't recruit travel tournaments a ton just because we're really JUCO heavy with our team. Over 70% of my roster is junior college transfers. We don't do the portal a whole lot. I've had 1 or 2 girls transfer in from other 4-year schools, but most of our roster is junior college related. Now, we do go out and we bring in the occasional incoming freshman, and we find those players from travel ball events, but I usually find those players at college camps. I go to LSU every year. I work their camps twice a year. Beth Tarina, the head coach there, is a really good friend. And she's really good about picking up the phone and calling me and saying, hey, I saw a player. I think they'd be a great fit for your program.
That's great.
And we have a good relationship in that regard. Pat Murphy's another one at Alabama who I talk to a lot. And the thing I like about both of those coaches is we talk more about life outside of softball than we do just softball. I really feel like the travel scene is blown up and all these players locally feel like they've got to go 7 states away to get recruited. And we just don't travel that far. We don't have to because our program's in such a good spot right now that word of mouth really helps us with our recruiting. People will call us and tell us about a player. And so I encourage any family or player that's watching this, don't limit your options because there's really good Division III softball, there's really good Division II, and there's really good Division I. There's really bad in all 3 of those as well. Outside of the Power Fives, I feel like we can compete to win a lot of conferences across the country in Division I, even though we're Division III. We're not going to win the Power 5 leagues and probably not going to win the Southland Conference or the Sun Belt, but there's a lot of really good leagues that we could win. So it's kind of offensive when people call us up and say, I've got a player, I think they can play for you, but they can't play at the Division I level. They may not even get on the field for us if they can't play at that level.
Well, so I want to shout out Walter Beatty because he had you on his podcast, and he's somebody who his son played. He obviously coached D3 in baseball. And what's interesting about what I heard when you were on his podcast is you did talk about, or maybe he even asked you, when you really look at the differences between like a D3 program and like a D1, it's not that at the D1 the players are so much better. It's maybe that there's more depth, right? And so that is something,
speed of the game.
Right. I played junior college baseball. And what was great about the program that I went to is if you could go there and play, you would leave that place and they would send you to LSU. They would send you to Miami. You would go to Long Beach back when, Long Beach was, probably sending more players to the big leagues eventually than anybody. Because you're in the athletic department, How has the business side of college sports changed in the last, call it 5 years?
It's pretty obvious that it's changed tremendously for the worse.
Right.
From the
I would
standpoint of
agree.
NIL and that sort of thing. People are no longer going to schools because they love that school and they love that program. They're going because of a school that can give them the most money. And you see that more at the Division I level, the big Power 5 level, but you don't really see that a whole lot at the D3 level. You might have some D3 schools up in the northern part of the United States that are dabbling into the NIL stuff. Players may go do a car commercial or something locally in town, and they're not going to get a whole lot of money out of that, but nothing like football for sure in Division I softball.
The thing that comes to mind as we kind of like dive into this is obviously what we're all seeing over the last week or so has been this Lane Kiffin stuff, right? And this may be a little controversial, but one of the things that I continue to go back to and think about, and whether you agree with what he did or not, is college sports is in a place right now where whether it's players or coaches, everybody is taking an opportunity from a personal standpoint. And that is something when you talk about the business of college sports, it has completely changed things. You know, players have a hard time understanding that. They feel like he needed to be committed to the program. But what's interesting is, you know, the coach does it and gets a lot of backlash. But when players do it, maybe there's not so much backlash. And so I feel like when you said earlier that it's changed for the worse, I agree, right? Going back 10, 15 years ago, when you're a player, you would say, yeah, like maybe I grew up, rooting for USC, right? The Trojans. So I would go to USC because it's always been my dream. It didn't matter that they were going to pay me the most. This was my dream. Where today I've got 5 offers. They're offering me the most. So like that's making my decision. They say it's college, but it's really like the minor leagues in a sense, right? Like these are kind of professional athletes on some level earlier. And I do feel like that idea is almost leaking even more so into amateur sports. I remember, 10 years ago now, maybe there was a kid who was like 13 years old on the cover of Time magazine. And it was basically all about how travel baseball is now being professionalized. So if we could dive, I guess, a little bit back into this softball idea and the softball sport, help bust, I guess, a myth that you think a lot of parents believe about softball and college softball that isn't true.
I think the biggest thing is from Division I to Division II to Division III, parents think that just because you're at Division III and it's non-athletic scholarship that you're not getting money. That's the biggest myth at our level. We give a lot of money to not just athletes, but to the regular student as well. And our average scholarship for my team was around $8,500. That's when we were given athletic money. And we got word that we were going to transition into Division III. Well, obviously Division III is no athletic money. It's all academic. Well, when I found out that we could convert all of our players from athletic money to academic money, our average scholarship for our players went from about $8,500 to just under $20,000. When I made the call to tell some parents that, some parents were so misinformed that they still wanted it to be athletic money. And I would tell them, why does it matter where the money comes from? It all comes from the same pool of money. It's just what you call it. You're still getting a whole lot more money to come to school here. We had a few players that would leave and go to another school for lesser money because it wasn't athletic money. And so that's one of the biggest pieces of misinformation about the Division III level is that just because it's Division III and it's non-athletic scholarship, you're still able to get really good money at most schools that you would want to attend.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I didn't know that. What if you had a daughter who was 10 and you were entering into kind of like the formative years of we're going to now develop her into being hopefully a really successful college softball player. How are you designing the next, call it 5 to 8 years of her development?
I think it gets Really, it used to get really like serious at 12 years old, which is ridiculously stupid that a 12-year-old would get offered by a college program. It was all the Florida rule, right? I think back there was a kid who got offered as a 12-year-old or a sixth grader by University of Florida. It's been 8 or 10, 12 years ago now. I think that offer started changing the whole dynamic of when colleges could actually start offering kids. And that age started pushing older and older. But now at this day and age, a Division I coach can't even talk to a player until they're a junior in high school now,
Right.
which I think is great. It lets the kid be a kid and navigate the whole process of where they might want to go to school a little bit slower than it used to be. Everything was happening so fast. So I would say just take your time. Don't make it as serious as it needs to be until you need to make it serious, and that's about that 10th and 11th grade year. But it's really tough to navigate with a kid when your kid's being hit from all different directions. Parents are getting calls from not just coaches, but if your kid's good enough, especially in baseball, to play, you're getting hit from the agent side, and you're getting hit from all different sides. So just let them be a kid as long as they can be a kid is my best advice.
Yeah, and going back to the old way of things, before it was, August 1st of your junior year, yeah, you could commit them at any point, right? So you'd see these kids in 8th grade committing to this college, and then fast forward when that kid is 17, 18 years old, now they're a junior or even a senior, you look at the numbers and you realize the majority of kids at that point either haven't developed like they were expecting, and then the university doesn't have the scholarship for them anymore, and they encourage them to go somewhere else. Or the kid now, maybe he committed to a smaller school and now he wants to open things up and go to a bigger school. So it was some crazy percentage. It was, and I'm just going off of my memory, but it was something like 80% of the kids, if they committed as early as 13 years old, would never even, still have that same commitment when they were going into that, junior, senior season. So I agree with you. I think allowing kids to develop more naturally and just be a kid and not worry about the business stuff quite yet is only going to make things better. Of all the things that have changed, I feel like that is a good rule.
It's great.
Yeah, it's certainly improved things.
And backtracking to your conversation, you're talking about Ole Miss, Lane Kiffin. You said players are able to leave all the time. They just up and leave. Why shouldn't coaches be able to just up and leave? My comment, thinking back to that, would be coaches are supposed to be more mature. The players aren't mature enough at that point in their life to realize what is right. Coaches know what's right.
Right. They should anyway.
Coaches should know what's right. And you should know how to prioritize what's more important to the program as a whole. You as a coach have worked your whole career to get into this situation where you can go compete for a national championship. And they can say money isn't a factor. That's crap. Money was the big factor. Maybe not as a salary because he was already making big money, but NIL money was a factor. What could they give the kid was a factor. But I just look back on it and say the adult is supposed to be the most mature person in the room in that situation. The kid is not supposed to be the most mature person. Adults should be able to make their own responsible decisions in those situations. So just had to go back to that a little bit.
And it makes me think about, so I'm actually reading this book right now. I'm a Christian man, and I'm reading this book by Tim Keller called, I think it's Counterfeit God. And what came to me when you said that is, a lot of our focus in the world today is success, right? So we've make that our idol in a sense. And when you take, whether it's a coach, whether take a player, and their idol becomes, well, I got to do whatever I can to have the most success possible, that will lead you to make decisions. And in Lane's case, I know that I'm sure he feels like this, I had to do it. It was the best thing for me. When in reality, if you had somebody grounded and rooted in, why am I actually coaching? I'm not coaching for myself in a sense. Sure, if I'm really good at this, I'd like to think that I can make it a career and make a lot of money, and that all that stuff is going to take care of itself. But my foundation is I want to develop young men.
That's a great point. And I always say that you should do things for a cause and not for applause. That's something that I always tell my players. If you're trying to do something just for a pat on the back, then you're not doing it for the right reason. You should be doing it for a cause. I've coached a long time. I've finished second in the nation 3 times now. Haven't been able to win the big game. I'm to the point where I would love to, but as long as I'm not coaching to win that big game and get a pat on the back. I coach for a cause, and I want my players to experience the opportunity to get into a big game and give themselves a chance to win a big game. If you can play on the very last day of the year, every year, if you strive to do that, whether you win it or not, I feel like my cause is putting my players in that situation so that they can experience that joy. I get into situations sometimes where comparison, you've heard the comment, comparison's the thief of joy. You start comparing how many wins other program coaches have over how many that you have and how many national championships over. Well, their resources may be different. Their recruiting base may be a lot wider. I don't worry about that stuff as much anymore as I used to, more so than doing things for a specific cause for my players' sake to give them the best opportunity to experience success.
I love that. That relates to a lot of things, right? It's the applause is a byproduct of doing other things well. Winning is a byproduct of doing all these other things really well. Eventually having the success, getting to the big leagues is a byproduct of putting the work in. And if you can take that mentality and you could truly apply that to anything. If you don't do it for those reasons though, and you flip that upside down, right? Like I oftentimes on this podcast talk about too many families have this hierarchy of focus where exposure is number 1, competition is kind of number 2, and then development is number 3. And I've always said that needs to be upside down. Development needs to be the number 1 thing, and then a byproduct of developing the right way. You're going to use competition, going to tournaments and showcases and competing to test the development. And then a natural byproduct of doing both of those things really well is you're going to get the exposure.
Yeah, I think people practice not enough. These days, they play too much. Like you go play all these travel ball tournaments, you may play 70 games in a summer. You may practice 5 times. A lot of travel ball these days, people are just showing up at a facility 2 states away, and that's the only time they ever see their teammates is they show up and play. They don't develop any chemistry and that sort of thing with their teammates, and they don't practice and develop as a team. They may be practicing at home. They may be developing as an individual, but are they getting good coaching? Sometimes I think we play too much.
Yeah. I think parents are so, like if I had to visually give parents almost an analogy, they feel like this window of time is closing, right? So it's like, oh my gosh, we have to maximize this time. What do? We have to go, and it's more. We have to do more. When in reality, no, you have to probably do less.
Less
right?
is more a lot of times.
Yeah. And so Craig Holman, who obviously put us in touch and introduced us, he talked about it when I had him on the podcast where he's like, yeah, if your sole focus is exposure, you're going to go to an event and you are going to get overexposed. And then what message is that sending to whether it's the college, these pro scouts, whomever it is that you're trying to impress? That's the stuff that's going to ultimately do you more harm than good. Parents listening to this may say, oh, well, your son is the top prospect in all of minor league baseball. He was a first-round pick. Like he is the golden boy of the sport at the moment. Tell us what you did. What are the 5 things you did? And if we do these 5 things, maybe our son's going to be the next Connor Griffin. In reality, so first off, he's got some God-given talent, right? You certainly were able to do things well with him. But as you look back now at your journey with Connor, as he was kind of going through travel baseball, as you reflect back on it now, what are some of the things, and maybe there's only one thing that comes to mind that you're like, no, that was really smart that we were able to do that?
Well, the biggest thing is we didn't chase the exposures. We talked about that earlier. He only did 1 or 2 of those true exposures where you go and work out and they give you your running speed and your throwing speed or arm velo and that kind of thing. As a parent and as a coach, I refuse to spend money to go to those things for people to tell me what I already knew.
Right.
Like, I've got the technology to know those numbers. I know what exit velos are. I know how hard he could throw. I didn't need a radar gun for that. Probably the best thing we ever did was we started out local and played local until Connor ended up going to some college camps and getting on college campuses. When he got his first offer in 8th grade, it was from Tulane University. Jay Ullman, who was there at the time, gave him his first offer. And then Ole Miss came right behind.
Was Travis Jewett there then?
He was.
Yeah, okay.
He was the head coach, and Jay was recruiting coordinator. But then Ole Miss came right behind it, and he got his first offers in 8th grade. And at that point, we started making sure Connor played on good enough teams that he could go get in front of even more coaches and that sort of thing. But we didn't do it every weekend. It was maybe once a month. We'd go play in a big event. And that's probably the one thing I think that we did well. And we did everything on our timeline. We didn't let college coaches dictate our timeline and force him into committing. And we made sure that Connor made his college visits. We wanted him to experience his, at the time, you could only do 5 officials. We wanted him to take his 5 official visits. We wanted him to enjoy the process and have fun and not commit as an 8th grader, because we knew the coaches may not even be there anymore by the time that he got out of high school. I feel like we were very wise in making those decisions for him to let him enjoy the whole process. And I think in turn, it helped people want him as a part of their programs even more, because we kind of slow played it and did it our way.
Yes, you just said what I was going to actually say in response to what I heard you say, which is you slowed things down for him to really enjoy the experience.
I don't know how many people know, but Connor skipped his 10th grade year of high school. He reclassed and went from 9th grade straight to 11th grade. A lot of people thought we were doing that strictly because of the draft and wanted him to be younger at the draft and that sort of thing. The God's honest truth about it is we reclassed him so that he would not have to talk to college coaches every night, as long as he had been doing it since 8th grade. He was picking up the phone. He had to call them to eliminate all the distractions of having to talk to college coaches every single night. That's why he reclassed in the beginning, was to get on campuses a year early. It ended up working out for the draft, because I believe if he were not 18 at the draft, I don't know that he would have been in the situation that he was in, just because for some reason an 18-year-old's looked at differently than a 19-year-old for whatever reason, even if they're talented. But that's really why we reclassed, is so he could start the recruiting process and really get it done.
Yeah. So to give everybody who's listening to this some insight, there's plenty of studies that have been done with Major League Baseball teams where the earlier you can get to the big leagues, it increases the likelihood that you have a more successful career. So when these pro teams are scouting these players, any one season may delay things. Maybe he's still a first rounder, but he's getting taken 25th. At what age did you say, I don't know, like if he's a first round, but this kid's different? What age was that for you?
As far as professional baseball goes, I would say his junior year in high school.
Okay. I love that. Junior year. So he's 16 years old.
Yeah. At 10 years old, we weren't thinking anything. At 12 years old, I was thinking, okay, he's got a chance potentially to be a really good college player. At 14, I thought he could be a Division I SEC type college player eventually. We weren't thinking professional angles at that point in time. His junior year, when we started getting, emails and calls from the scouting industry and that sort of thing, and we had chosen, we decided we needed to choose an agency at that point. It started getting real. And that's when we realized that this professional thing, did we know he was going to be a top 10 pick? No, we didn't know that. We knew he had the work ethic to potentially be that, but you don't know what these teams are thinking. It's all a business, and they want to, if they can get a discount on a player, they're going to take a discount. And when he got to be a senior in high school, we realized, okay, he's good enough that we're not going to allow him to take a discount. We're not going to let him be that type of player. He'll just go to LSU. That would be a huge piece for his development to just go ahead and go to LSU and instead of taking a big discount. So fortunately, we didn't have to do that. The Pirates were great through the whole process, and they were completely honest with us. And we knew that when they took him, that it was going to work out.
Wonderful. What's interesting is you're describing the ages where things started to kind of take shape a little bit. At what age did he go from playing more regional stuff to maybe more of these like national events?
We did a little bit of it at 14 and 15, but it was not really until the 16-year-old age group that he entertained going to. We never did Jupiter, but it's a really good event, but we just chose not to do Jupiter because I didn't believe in playing baseball in November, or in late October. Just didn't want to do it physically, and he was playing other sports too, so it was taken away from football and basketball also, and we didn't want him to miss something big at his high school, and it hurt his teammates. It hurt the rest of his team as far as them being able to win games. So that was just a decision that we made. But it wasn't until about the 16-year-old age group that we started doing national stuff.
It feels like it's this really comfortable ascension where you're seeing that he's good. All right, he's going from being somebody in your mind who's like, all right, this guy could be a pretty good college player. Then he gets a little bit older. Oh man, this guy could be like a legit SEC guy. And then now the draft starts to become real. And I would imagine part of that analysis for you where it started to take shape was, oh yeah, we went to this event and there were some pretty good players there. And he got, 10 hits over the weekend, right? And so all of a sudden, and not to play the comparison game, but you start realizing, I mean, he's holding his own. What's interesting about that is there are so many players, good players in pro ball. They'll go to high A and they may spend 2 years there. The first year, they're just kind of getting their feet wet. And then they'll realize, oh man, I can do this here. And then the second year at high A, they'll go off. Then they'll go to double A and like the same thing applies. I think parents sometimes think, no, every single tournament, every single game he plays, this kid's got to show out. No, I mean, yeah. I've had executives on the podcast and they talk about how important failure is for these kids' development. I, just did a podcast with Austin Riley and his family. And, Austin was somebody who he gets drafted in the first round. He goes down to the GCL in Florida and he's 0 for 23 with 18 strikeouts to start his pro career. And he says, he's like, if I hadn't gone through that, I don't know if I'm ever going to learn how to get out of the failure. How has failure been a part of that experience with Connor? Did he ever go, is there an event that you remember where it's like, oh man, he wasn't good that weekend, but that failure actually helped him become the player he is today?
Yeah, and I'm going to backtrack a little bit and then answer that question. We let him stay in his own age group when he was 8, 10, 12 years old because I felt like it was good for him to experience play in his own age group, experience success. Had he played up with his brother for 2 or 3 years and not experienced success, he may not even love the game.
Is that Cannon?
Cannon was his older brother. Caden's the younger brother. But we kept him in his own age group until he was around 14 or 15, and then we let him play up. I think it's important to get into the right travel organization who understands that and who will help you navigate through the process. The Knights Nation Baseball out of Mandeville, Louisiana was the perfect scenario for Connor. It was perfect because they let him play up, but then if he wanted to go back down and play with his own age group, then they were okay with that as well. So back to your question about experience and failure. Connor started his pro career kind of like Austin did. Connor was 2 for 2 in his first 2 at bats. He's like, man, I can do this.
Yeah.
And then the next 8 at bats, I think, were strikeouts after that. And, he had to really take a hard look at, okay, this isn't going to be as easy as the 2 for 2 I started out. It's going to be tough and it's going to take some hard work, and I've got to put in extra work outside of the games and stuff like that. So he experienced that failure, and then it just made him better because from that point forward, I don't know that he really experienced any failure the remainder of the minor league season.
Yeah.
Now, he had some streaks where he went, 0 for 2 or 0 for 3, but I don't think he ever went 3 at bats or more without getting on base at least. So the year after your junior year, for baseball purposes, is your most important year for the draft. You go to we had the MLB pipeline, PDP that year, the East Coast Pro, USA Trials. Those were 3 huge events. Well, the last regular season at bat of Connor's junior year of high school, he hit a home run, but he dislocated his shoulder on the swing. His shoulder popped out of place, and he didn't get to hit the entire playoffs. He could pitch and play defense, but he couldn't hit. That was something that really threw him for a loop because he couldn't be on the field and compete with his teammates. And those big events were coming up really quickly. So he had to rehab for 6 to 8 weeks. And he went to the PDP in Cary, North Carolina. And the first time that he swung a bat, not BP or anything, but the first time he took a swing was in a game. And that was the first swing he took in 8 weeks. And he struggled at PDP. He didn't know what his shoulder was going to feel like. He was putting the bat on his shoulder. He was wrapping it around his head. He was doing everything possible to alleviate the potential of pain because he didn't know how it was going to feel. He had a miserable event. He went to the East Coast Pro the next week. The first 2 days of the East Coast Pro, same thing, just bad. And he's like thinking that his future is just in jeopardy because everybody in the industry is there watching him play, watching all these guys play. And finally, he called me one night and he said, I don't know what to do. And I said, son, you're just going to have to cut it loose and let it fly. And you're not going to know how it feels until you just trust it and just see how it feels. If it feels terrible, then you'll know it feels terrible. So the next day, he went out to East Coast Pro, and I think he was 3 for 3 that day with a home run and a couple of doubles. And shoulder was fine. The next week, he had to go to California to the USA Trials. Lit it up out there, ended up making the team, going to Taiwan, had a great event in Taiwan, didn't strike out in 27 at-bats in Taiwan. And from that point forward, everything just clicked. But we had to listen to all the criticism, all the negativity, people saying that he had a hit tool problem. And they didn't know the why behind it. We couldn't say anything. We had to bite our lip. And if we'd have said, he had dislocated shoulder, then we probably wouldn't be sitting in the situation because people would probably not have drafted him as high as they did, thinking that he had an issue. He didn't have any issue at that time. He just had to heal, but people didn't know that. And he had to experience that failure and listen to all those people be critical of him. Even to this day, you hear he had a hit tool problem back then. No, he didn't. He was a great hitter. He was worried and he didn't know how his shoulder was going to feel. And that's why he was doing what he did. So he had to experience that failure to finally experience success. And I think that made him the player that he is today.
We're in an odd world today where, social media, you post a picture of somebody, let's say you post a picture of your son or he posts a picture of him hitting at a game. And when players are ranked really high, naturally, there's a lot of people out there that could be haters.
They have an opinion.
That's right. And we're in this world where you could read these comments if you so choose. And it's no different than if someone were to send you a text message. So I always tell my players, don't look at the comments, right? And I recognize that it's next to impossible, right? But it's like fans having your phone number and they're sending you a text telling you what they think about your game, right? So it's one of those things where I do think down the road, we're going to have a lot more mentally strong players because they're having to deal with that way earlier than they ever have before.
Social media is a game changer.
Really is. Really is.
Good negatively.
Good or bad, depending on your perspective.
It can help promote you.
Yeah.
But it also can cause you to start doubting yourself.
Right. How was the in-home visit kind of experience for you guys? Because I always tell these families it's so wild, right? It's obviously an honor, right? Anytime a pro organization wants to come into your home. But it's interesting because they clearly have an agenda, right? They're trying to extract as much information as possible that they can hopefully use and I don't want to say against you, but in a sense, like, yeah, I mean, they're trying to figure out, like, especially for someone as talented as Connor, it's, we know why you're good. Tell us why maybe there's some issues here, and we're not just going to come out saying what's wrong with you, right?
Yeah, and Joey and Casey with Excel did such a good job of putting parameters on these home visits. Like, we limited it to an hour and a half, and we would always stack more than one in a day, because the first person that went knew that, okay, we've got to end at this time because you've got somebody else coming in. So we didn't want to drag it out. And we had a few on single days that would stay there 3.5 hours.
They'll stay as long as you let
nuts. And we're not the type of family, we weren't going to push them out, because this was an honor to have people in our home. But, the area guys come in, they just, they want to sit there and chit chat and chat it up as much as they can. Yeah, you're right. You want to make sure that you promote your kid in a positive way and answer all their questions. But we kind of sat back as parents and we let him have it.
Right. And I always tell families, you got to, like, give your kid a little bit of grace too, going through that process, because other kids who are 17, 18 years old, like, what are the decisions that they're having to make at that point? It's like, what am I eating for lunch? Right. And here Connor is saying, like, oh man, do I want to go sign? Do I want to go to college? Right. So it's certainly a much more pressure packed decision that anybody needs to make. But I do want to shout out Jay Johnson at LSU, who I have a great deal of respect for. How was the going through the draft? We'll go like a month before the draft. How was the experience knowing, all right, you have a really good opportunity at college? We don't know how the draft is going to go necessarily. Hopefully it goes really well. But was that something that maybe you guys as a family or Connor kind of carried that was maybe a little challenging?
Jay made it tough.
Yeah.
Because he's such a great developer and just a great guy. It even went back as far as when Nolan Cain was at LSU and started the recruiting process.
Absolutely.
When he left, we were kind of bummed, but they ended up in a good spot with Josh Jordan and Josh is a great guy. But Jay, what we loved about him is he would come into our house even during the whole draft process, and he had a book about 50 pages deep showing us why it was still a good thing for Connor if he had gone to LSU. All the players that had come through that program that had capitalized monetarily by going to school first and then going to the draft. And he made it tough. I mean, he sold it.
He's impressive.
He sold it really well. And I think everything that he showed us was factual. There was nothing he was just making up. He had facts to prove it. And he made the decision very difficult. But in the end, he knew also if Connor's a first round pick and he's a top 10 guy, he's not going to be able to turn down life-changing money. NIL money in baseball for incoming freshmen is nothing compared to what they give to the transfer portal. And this day and age, when you hear baseball families say, yeah, my kid's getting $2 million to go to X university, I don't tell them this, but I'm just thinking in my head, you're full of crap, because I know what Connor could have got, and it was not anywhere close. Now the portal kids are getting a whole lot more money, but generally you're not getting money.
Yeah, there's a lot of misinformation out there. And I think sometimes families, they hear the dollars that are being thrown around in football and they think it's the same in baseball. It's obviously not. And, two teammates will talk and you'll get a phone call from a player being like, hey, my teammate says he's getting $100,000 from Nike. And it's like, he's not getting $100,000 from Nike, right? But I think sometimes families like to talk generally about, oh yeah, we've got a couple $1,000,000 coming to us. We were talking earlier about what makes a good coach. And, we were talking when I brought up the counterfeit God, narrative. That is something I will say that when you meet Jay Johnson and you talk to him, that from a foundational standpoint, he is in it for the right reasons. When he tells you things about your son, it's not, he casually is just shooting from the hip. Like, no, he's done his homework. He knows all about your son and he cares. And that comes off so clear.
Look at Derek Curio. I mean, he chose to bypass the draft, and it would have been a first round draft pick, but he chose to go to LSU, and now he's going to be a top 10 pick. If he's not a top 10 pick, then people have missed the mark. That kid had a great year last year. If he has another great year this year or even close, he's going to be a top 10 pick. And it's going to be all worth it for Derek. Derek's a great kid. Connor and Derek are great friends, and I can't wait to see what he does this year.
Well, it is going to be exciting watching what happens this next year with Connor. But as we wrap up, we have a couple minutes left. I always like to end on kind of like a rapid fire scenario, really quick answers.
Yeah.
First thing that comes to mind. So the first one is, what's one thing parents should stop doing at games immediately?
I'm probably guilty of this, especially at basketball, and that's why I broadcast all of our high school games, so I can't yell instructions
I knew you were a
at my
natural.
kid.
Okay, yeah.
Probably stop coaching your kids from the stands, and I say that as a guilty guy. But I think that's the one thing they should stop doing, and stop comparing to other kids. Just let them be a kid.
So put your softball coach hat on here for a second. What is one red flag that makes you back away from a player fast?
Body language, how they respond to certain situations, and if they let it show on their face or not.
What's harder to coach, talent or attitude?
Attitude, for sure. Especially if it's a bad attitude. You're not going to generally make a bad attitude a good attitude. You might as well just cut them loose.
Right. You can improve somebody's talent, but if they have a bad attitude, that's almost not even coachable. What is your biggest coaching pet peeve?
I'm a superstitious guy, so I'm a creature of habit, and I can't stand if players step on lines when they're running on the field, especially when I had to chalk it off.
Yeah.
I like to salvage it, but probably my biggest pet peeve is a player that just walks onto the field and doesn't sprint to their position every single time that they take the field, whether it's practice or whether it's a game.
Yeah, because you can control that. It's the easiest thing to do, right? Effort. What do you think the best trait is for a teammate? A vocal leader or a lead by example?
Ooh, that's a great question. You always need vocal leaders because you don't have players a lot of times. Sometimes you go years or seasons where you don't have anybody be a vocal leader. So I love a vocal leader, but players that lead from within by example, you're going to have better teams because of that.
Okay, last one. If you could outlaw one youth sports trend, what would it be?
Walk-up music at travel ball tournaments. There's no need.
I have not seen this yet.
No need for people to have a boom box in a fourplex with 3 other games going on and having walk-up music for every player that comes to the field and some AI-generated announcer calling out their name when they walk to the plate. And this happens at 6, 7, 8, 9 years old.
Oh,
it's
man.
the craziest thing. And it's a distraction to the other games that are going on around you as well. So that's probably something I'd love to see just be gone out of the sport. Softball or baseball.
I have not seen this yet, but I can tell you right now that would drive me nuts too, right? It's like, what are we doing? Can we just go play baseball? All right, last thing. Is there anything that we didn't touch on today that you feel like, parents need to know this?
I really think we covered a lot of what I was thinking and wanting to get out of this, but just let your kids be kids. And that's the biggest thing that I will say. Don't force it down their throat. And we touched on that a little bit, but the one thing I will say is your kid is trying to please you more than any other person. They're not worried about what little Johnny, the teammate's family, thinks about him. They're not worried about a college coach at 8, 10, 12 years old. They're worried about what you as a parent think. And if you realize that they're trying to please you first and foremost, more than anything in the world, you'll have a better relationship with your kid because of how you'll respond to their success and their failure. Just treat them as your kid. Don't treat them as somebody that you're trying to get to the league one day.
Yeah, so I just did a podcast actually on the difference between expectations and agreements that parents have with their kids, right? Expectations are these things that live in your heads that it's like, well, I expect my kid to give 110%. I expect my kid to turn into this type of player, but they never, ever really sit down and have a conversation with their son. And a parent may feel like, well, no, my son knows what I expect. But in reality, it's not so much that they do or don't understand it. It's Have you given him an opportunity? Have you had the conversation where you've asked him questions about, this is what I expect. Are you agreeing to be committed to this? Because when they don't have the conversation, naturally, when the kid does something on the baseball field that maybe goes against what they expected, what happens? The parent's frustrated. He's angry at the player. And the player naturally is defensive, saying like, come on, mom and dad, like you're too hard on me. This is a little ridiculous.
Yeah, and I've had to have that conversation with all three of my boys over the years. And even at 19 and in pro ball, Connor, he'll tell you, he said it before on podcasts, that he knows that I have expectations for him because I know how good he can be. And I'm not going to ask him to try to do something if I don't believe it's going to help him. Or on the flip side, I'm not going to tell him not to do something if I think it's not going to help him. I have that conversation with my oldest son, Cannon, when he was playing baseball. He knew what I expected out of him because I knew how good that he could be. And he was very good at listening and trying to do what I asked him to do. Caden's the same way. Right now in basketball, he's on a team where he don't have to be an offensive contributor, but the biggest thing he's got to do is he's got to give effort. He's got to have a great attitude. He's got to rebound and play defense. He don't have to score because he's not asked to. He's got to accept that and be good at those things. And then the rest will come as he gets older and he's going to have to be the leader in years to come. So all my kids, they know what I expect out of them, but I'm not going to be mad at them when they don't accomplish what my expectations are. And I think a lot of parents have a negative relationship with their kids because they get mad at their kid if they don't live up to their expectations. And that's not a good father-son, mother-daughter, father-daughter, mother-son relationship to have if you treat your kids that way. So love doing this today. I appreciate you having me on, and it's been fun.
Tell everybody if they want to reach out to you, their daughter plays softball. What's the best way to communicate?
Email Griffin, Griffin, at belhaven.edu. And people a lot of times misspell Belhaven. It's only one L. So Griffin at belhaven.edu. And my wife's cell phone number. No, I'm just kidding.
That's great. That's great. Yeah.
Yeah, she'd kill me.
I love it.
But our contact information's on our website. We've been a top 10 program for several years now. Finished national runner-ups 2 years ago. We've got a good thing going at Belhaven. And just, if you've got a good softball player, don't limit it to Division I. You can come have a great experience and have a chance to compete for championships at a place like Belhaven University.
I love it. We mentioned Clint Hurdle earlier. He actually just came out with a new book, Hurdleisms. Go check it out. And then I mentioned Walter Beatty. You should check out his podcast as well, which is a really good resource, Beatty Baseball. And another good resource for everybody is Matt Antonelli, who is an ex-pro ball player who's now coaching a college as well. So thank you, everybody. It's been a blast. Kevin, thank you.
Yep,
this was fun.
Thank you.
Yeah.